The moment wasn't supposed to mean anything. That's what makes it dangerous. It lasted only a few seconds, played out on a sideline most fans weren't even watching, until the broadcast cut to it at the worst possible time. A wide receiver clapping his hands inches from his quarterback's face. A rookie starring back, stone-faced, tablet still in hand. Voices rising just enough to be felt, not fully heard. And suddenly, an entire season felt like it cracked open in public. This wasn't trash talk. This wasn't competitive fire boiling over. This was frustration that had been sitting quietly for months, finally losing patience. The cameras didn't catch a football disagreement. They caught a power struggle, one that Cleveland had been pretending didn't exist. Jeudy didn't just look angry, he looked fed up, like someone who felt ignored for too long. Shedeur didn't look rattled, he looked blindsided, like someone realizing in real time that the room wasn't as united as he'd been led to believe. For a split second, the Browns' bench froze. Players looked away. Coaches hesitated. And then Ethan Posick sprinted in, physically placing himself between the two before things escalated further, not to calm a debate, to stop damage. That detail matters, because teams don't intervene like that unless they know something is already broken. The scoreboard made it worse. Cleveland was getting handled by San Francisco, the game slipping away, the noise growing louder. Losing exposes everything. It strips away rehearsed answers and forces real emotions to the surface. And in that moment, with millions watching, the Browns didn't just look outmatched. They looked disconnected. What most viewers didn't realize was that this tension didn't start on that sideline. It didn't even start that game. It had been building quietly, buried under coach speak, optimism, and the idea that things would work themselves out. One missed throw became the spark, but the fuel had been there all along. Different expectations, different timelines, different ideas of who this offense belongs to. That's why the moment felt heavier than a simple argument, because it raised an uncomfortable question nobody in the building wanted to answer out loud. Who's really in charge here? The Browns had sold the future on Shedeur, traded up, talked about development, talked about patience. But patience is hard to sell to veterans trying to protect their careers. And respect isn't automatic in an NFL locker room. It's earned through preparation, opportunity, and trust. When any one of those is missing, resentment fills the gap. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to stay locked in on all the latest NFL drama, make sure you hit that like button. It helps the video reach more people who love this content just like you. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another update, reaction, or storyline as it unfolds in real time. I also want to hear from you in the comments. What do you think about Shedeur performance and the Browns' collapse? Drop your thoughts below and let's talk about it. And don't forget to share this video with friends who follow the NFL. Your support truly keeps the channel moving forward. The broadcast cut away quickly. Analysts moved on. Social media clipped it, slowed it down, replayed it from every angle. And just like that, Cleveland's internal issues weren't internal anymore. What was supposed to stay between teammates became a referendum on the entire organization. Because the real story wasn't what was said. It was why it finally had to be said on national television. And once that door opened, there was no closing it again. Arguments like this don't come out of nowhere. They're never about one play, no matter how much everyone wants to pretend they are. That missed throw was just the excuse. The kind that gives long-simmering frustration permission to surface. And in Cleveland, that frustration had been stacking up quietly, snap by snap. From Jeudy's perspective, the situation was already tense before the season ever kicked off. He wasn't just another receiver running routes. He was the supposed number one option, coming off a year where he proved he could carry an offense when things broke down. When a receiver like that feels open and the ball doesn't come, it hits different. It doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like a message. Whether that message was intentional or not almost doesn't matter. On the other side, Shedeur was walking into one of the most unforgiving roles in sports. A rookie quarterback labeled as the future before he ever had a chance to settle in. Every throw dissected, every miss magnified. And unlike veterans, rookies don't get the benefit of assumed competence. They're expected to earn trust immediately, often without the reps or protection that make that possible. One hesitation, one misread, and suddenly the doubt starts to creep in. That's where the inevitability comes in. A veteran receiver desperate for consistency and respect. A young quarterback still learning the speed of the league, both under pressure, both needing each other, and both feeling like they're carrying more than their share of the burden. When those worlds collide, it's only a matter of time. The specific play that sparked the confrontation was simple on paper. Jeudy believed he had leverage on the defender. Sanders believed the window wasn't clean enough to risk it. That difference in interpretation is common. What isn't common is how quickly it escalated. That tells you the disagreement wasn't about route depth or timing. It was about trust, or the lack of it. Receivers want the ball thrown where only they can make a play. Quarterbacks want receivers exactly where the play design says they'll be. When those expectations don't line up, frustration builds. But in healthy locker rooms, that frustration gets handled in meetings, in practice, behind closed doors. It doesn't spill onto the sideline for everyone to see. In Cleveland, there was no release valve, no established rhythm between quarterback and receiver to fall back on, no shared history of success to smooth over mistakes, just pressure, impatience, and a season already slipping away. That's why the argument felt raw. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't calculated. It was what happens when people feel unheard. And once it started, there was no easy way to stop it, because backing down would have meant admitting something bigger. For Jeudy, it would have meant accepting a reduced role in an offense still finding itself. For Sanders, it would have meant conceding authority before he ever truly had it. Neither was ready to do that. So the argument wasn't a shock. It was a deadline. The moment when all the things Cleveland hoped would magically sort themselves out finally demanded attention. And the worst part? Everyone knew it was coming. They just didn't expect the cameras to catch it. The most uncomfortable problems in football are the ones nobody wants to say out loud. They don't show up on injury reports. They don't get addressed in press conferences. They hide in plain sight until a single stat exposes everything. And in Cleveland, that stat was impossible to ignore. Shedeur Sanders didn't complete a pass to Jeudy until week 13. Let that sink in. Not in training camp. Not in preseason tune-ups. Not even during mop-up duty earlier in the year. The Browns' most accomplished receiver and the quarterback positioned as the future of the franchise went nearly an entire season without connecting in a real game. That isn't bad luck. That's a chemistry problem so severe it borders on organizational failure. Fans were told everything was fine, that chemistry would come with time, that practice reps were enough. But chemistry doesn't form in theory. It forms under pressure in live action when trust is tested and timing matters. Without that, even the most talented pairings feel disconnected. And the longer it goes unaddressed, the heavier it becomes. Jeudy isn't the kind of receiver who disappears by accident. He thrives on rhythm, on knowing exactly when the ball is coming and where it will be. When that rhythm never develops, frustration builds quietly. Routes start feeling pointless. Effort becomes harder to sustain, not because the player doesn't care, but because nothing feels synchronized. For a veteran, that's exhausting. For Sanders, the situation was just as damaging. He wasn't being eased into a role with his top target. He was being asked to perform without the safety net most young quarterbacks rely on. No built-in chemistry. No established go-to option. Just expectations. When a rookie quarterback doesn't trust his number one receiver, or vice versa, every snap becomes heavier than it should be. What made it worse was the silence around it. No coach publicly acknowledged the disconnect. No explanation was offered. The team acted like it wasn't happening, even as the numbers screamed otherwise. That kind of avoidance doesn't protect players. It isolates them. And isolation is where resentment grows. By the time Sanders finally completed that first pass to Jeudy, the moment felt overdue instead of exciting. It wasn't a breakthrough. It was a reminder of how long the problem had been allowed to linger. That's why the sideline confrontation hit so hard. It wasn't about that one missed throw. It was about weeks of missed opportunities. Around the league, people noticed. Quietly at first, then more openly. Because this isn't how functional teams operate. You don't invest in a quarterback, roster a high-profile receiver, and let them exist in parallel universes. You force the connection. You prioritize it. You build around it. Cleveland didn't. And whether by neglect or design, the result was the same. Two players expected to carry the offense without ever being truly connected. That kind of disconnect doesn't just affect the stat sheet. It erodes trust. It turns small mistakes into personal slights, and eventually it spills over. By the time the argument happened, the chemistry problem wasn't new. It was just finally visible. It didn't take long for the reaction to spread beyond Cleveland. Former players saw the clip and immediately recognized something fans might have missed. This wasn't just a bad moment. It was a signal. And when NFL legends start speaking in unison, it's usually because they've seen this movie before. Cam Newton was one of the first to say what others were only hinting at. He didn't dance around it. He went straight at the dynamic. A veteran receiver getting in a rookie quarterback's face on the sideline during a blowout is backwards. That's not how locker rooms work, not the ones that win. Newton made it clear that performance matters, and in his view, Jeudy hadn't earned the right to question anyone publicly, let alone the guy tasked with leading the franchise. But Newton's criticism went deeper than just that moment. He's been watching how Cleveland handled Sanders from the start, and the sideline clip confirmed his suspicions. Something about this setup didn't feel right. The lack of preparation, the mixed messaging, the way responsibility seemed to shift depending on who was talking. To Newton, it looked like a young quarterback being put in positions to fail, then blamed when things went wrong. Michael Irvin echoed that sentiment in his own way. As a Hall of Fame receiver, Irvin understands frustration better than most. He knows what it feels like to feel open and not get the ball. But he also understands hierarchy. Quarterbacks aren't just teammates. They're the engine of the offense. You don't undermine them in public, ever. Irvin pointed out something few people wanted to acknowledge. Sanders had thrown Jeudy a clean ball the week before, and the play still fell apart. No confrontation followed. No sideline explosion. The difference in reaction said everything. From Irvin's perspective, that imbalance was the red flag. Accountability only flowing one direction is how teams fracture. When veterans feel entitled to confront rookies publicly, it creates tension that can't be smoothed over with meetings or statements. It changes how everyone in the room views leadership. Even Browns legend Hanford Dixon weighed in, offering a more measured take. He didn't deny the optics looked bad. He didn't excuse the behavior, but he pointed to the reality of the modern NFL. Cameras everywhere. Every disagreement captured, clipped, and amplified. Still, Dixon's underlying message was clear. Some things are handled behind closed doors for a reason. When they aren't, it reflects a lack of internal control. What made these reactions so telling wasn't just the criticism. It was the consistency. Different eras, different positions, same conclusion. This didn't look like a healthy situation. Legends don't overreact to one clip. They react to patterns. And to them, this was the latest chapter in a story Cleveland has been struggling to tell properly. Because when people who have lived through locker room collapse start warning you, it's rarely about drama. It's about recognizing the early signs of something coming apart. If the sideline argument exposed the tension, the practice reps explained why it existed in the first place. Because beneath the emotions and the finger-pointing was a detail so alarming that former players couldn't believe it was real. Shedeur Sanders entered the season without a single first-team practice rep. Not limited reps, not reduced reps, 0. For a quarterback the organization traded up to draft, that fact alone raised eyebrows across the league. This isn't how teams develop their future. Practice is where trust is built, where timing forms, where mistakes happen safely. Taking that away from a rookie quarterback doesn't protect him. It isolates him. The Browns' explanation was never direct. They talked about competition, about earning opportunities, about veteran presence. But those phrases don't change the reality. When game day arrived and Sanders was suddenly asked to perform against starting defenses, he was doing it without the foundation every quarterback needs. No chemistry with his primary receiver. No rhythm with the first unit, just expectation. That's where Cam Newton's theory started gaining traction. He questioned whether this was mismanagement or something more calculated. In his words, it looked like a setup, not in a dramatic sense, but in a subtle one. If a quarterback struggles after being denied reps, the organization can point to the results instead of the process. The blame shifts quietly. Around the league, coaches noticed. Former quarterbacks noticed. Because even developmental projects get preparation, especially ones you've publicly invested in. Giving Sanders 0 first-team reps sent a message, intentional or not. You're not the priority, you're the contingency plan. That message matters in a locker room. Receivers notice who gets reps. Linemen notice who runs the huddle. Veterans gravitate toward stability. When Sanders finally stepped onto the field in live action, he wasn't just fighting the opposing defense. He was fighting perception. The idea that he wasn't fully trusted before he ever took a snap. And this ties directly back to the chemistry problem. You can't build timing without repetition. You can't develop feel without shared experience. Expecting a rookie quarterback and a veteran receiver to sync up without meaningful practice is unrealistic. When it fails, frustration is inevitable. The most unsettling part is how normal it was treated. No public urgency. No admission that this might be an issue. The Browns acted like development could be skipped, like talent alone would cover the gap. That approach doesn't just stunt growth. It creates resentment. When Sanders struggled early, the narrative formed quickly. He wasn't ready. He was overwhelmed. He needed more time. What wasn't mentioned was how little preparation he'd been given. That omission shaped perception inside and outside the building. By the time Sanders finally started taking meaningful reps, the damage was already done. Doubt had set in. Trust had frayed. And the pressure had multiplied. That's why the sideline confrontation felt so loaded. It wasn't just about one missed throw. It was the collision point of a development plan that never truly existed. And once that realization set in, the questions stopped being about patience. They became about intent. 3 days after the blowout, the Browns tried to put the fire out with words. They lined up Shedeur Sanders and Jeudy in front of the microphones, side by side, and presented what looked like resolution. Smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. Carefully chosen phrases. The kind of public unity teams lean on when they need the story to stop growing. They called it a conversation, said everything was handled internally, said there were no hard feelings. Kevin Stefanski framed it as family business, the kind of disagreement that happens when people care. On the surface, it sounded reasonable, almost comforting. But the longer the press conference went on, the more obvious it became that this wasn't closure. It was containment. Jeudy spoke first. He admitted he wished he'd handled the situation differently. Not because he felt he was wrong, but because of how it looked. He said he should have waited until the cameras were off. That distinction mattered. It wasn't an apology for the message. It was an apology for the timing. He made it clear he still believes in speaking his mind, just not in public. Sanders' response was noticeably different. Where he's usually relaxed, even playful with the media, this time he was guarded. Short answers, no elaboration. When asked directly about the confrontation, he shut it down. Said they weren't going to speak on that. The rookie who rarely avoids a microphone suddenly had nothing to say. That silence spoke louder than anything else said that day. Body language told its own story. They sat close but not connected. No inside jokes, no easy back and forth, just two professionals doing what was required of them. To the untrained eye, it looked like maturity. To anyone familiar with locker rooms, it looked like a truce, not peace. That's why calling it a resolution felt premature. Real chemistry doesn't return overnight. It's rebuilt through repetition, trust, and shared success. None of that happens in a press conference. The Browns didn't fix the issue. They postponed it. Around the league, people noticed the stiffness. Former players pointed out how carefully Sanders chose his words, how Jeudy framed his regret, how the coach leaned on cliches instead of specifics. It all felt rehearsed, and rehearsed moments usually mean there's more happening behind the scenes. The goal wasn't reconciliation. It was optics. The organization needed to project stability, needed to reassure fans and sponsors that the situation was under control. But stability can't be declared. It has to be felt, and nothing about that press conference felt natural. By the time they walked off the podium, the questions hadn't gone away. They just changed shape. Instead of asking what happened, people started asking whether this partnership could actually work, whether the tension was temporary or structural, whether the silence was strategic or revealing. The Browns called it moving forward, but what they really did was pause the story, and everyone knew the next chapter wouldn't be written with words, it would be written on the field. The tension didn't disappear after the press conference. It followed them into practice, into meetings, into the quiet moments where trust either rebuilds or fully collapses. That's why what happened the following Sunday felt so unexpected. Because instead of more awkwardness, the Browns delivered a moment that completely flipped the narrative. For the first time all season, Shedeur Sanders took every first-team rep in practice. No rotation, no limitations, no easing him in. The offense was finally his to command. And just as importantly, Jeudy was right there with him, running timing routes over and over, refining details that should have been addressed months earlier. The urgency was obvious. Everyone knew the league was watching. The opponent almost didn't matter. Tennessee came in with a brutal record, the kind of team you're supposed to beat quietly. But this game wasn't about the standings. It was about proof. Proof that the relationship wasn't broken beyond repair. Proof that the argument hadn't permanently poisoned the offense. Then it happened. Late in the second quarter, Sanders dropped back, scanned the field, and saw Jeudy streaking down the sideline. No hesitation, no second-guessing. He let it fly. The ball traveled nearly 60 yards through the air, a perfect spiral cutting through the noise. Jeudy didn't slow down. He didn't look back early. He ran like he knew exactly where the ball would land. And when it dropped into his hands, Huntington Bank Field erupted. That single throw did more than add 6 points to the scoreboard. It changed the energy of the entire building. On the sideline, Sanders and Jeudy celebrated together. No forced smiles, no stiffness, just relief. For a moment, everything people had been arguing about vanished. Analysts immediately jumped on it. Chemistry, timing, potential. The same voices that questioned whether the pairing could work suddenly sounded convinced. Fans clipped the play and shared it everywhere. That was the connection Cleveland had been waiting for. Sanders didn't stop there. He played with confidence the rest of the game, throwing for 364 yards, 3 touchdowns through the air, and adding 1 on the ground. It was the best performance of his young career. The kind of game that quiets doubt, at least temporarily. Jeudy finished with modest numbers overall, but that deep catch carried more weight than any stat line. But even in that moment of optimism, something felt fragile. Because one play doesn't erase months of tension. It doesn't undo lost reps or damaged trust. It proves possibility, not permanence. The 60-yard throw rewrote the story everyone thought they were watching. It showed that Sanders and Jeudy could coexist, that the ceiling was real. But it also raised a new, more uncomfortable question. If this was always possible, why did it take a public confrontation to unlock it? And as it turned out, the story wasn't done rewriting itself just yet. Because what happened after that touchdown reminded everyone that in Cleveland, momentum never comes without consequences. Just when it felt like the Browns had steadied themselves, one decision brought all the doubt rushing back. Late in the game, with everything still within reach, Cleveland lined up for a 2-point conversion. The moment was tailor-made for a quarterback trying to establish himself. High pressure, high trust. One play to prove the offense belonged in his hands. And then Shedeur Sanders walked off the field. Kevin Stefanski pulled his rookie quarterback and handed the ball to the running back instead. No explanation in the moment, no visible injury, just a sudden shift that stunned the sideline and confused everyone watching. The play failed. The Browns lost. And the brief sense of momentum evaporated instantly. In the NFL, decisions like that echo far beyond one play. Quarterbacks feel them. Teammates notice them. Opponents sense them. When a coach removes his quarterback in a defining moment, it sends a message, whether intended or not. It says trust has limits. It says the leash is short. Cam Newton didn't hesitate to call it out. He labeled the decision a fireable offense, not because the play failed, but because of what it represented. In his view, you don't spend weeks preaching development and belief, then take the ball out of your quarterback's hands when it matters most. That contradiction undermines everything you're trying to build. For Sanders, the message was impossible to miss. He had just delivered the best performance of his career. He had finally connected with his top receiver. And when the season hung in the balance, he wasn't allowed to finish the job. Moments like that linger. They shape how players view their coaches. They influence how much freedom a quarterback feels on the field. Inside the locker room, reactions were muted, but the questions were loud. Why now? Why that play? Was it about matchups or fear? Stefanski later framed it as a football decision. The safest explanation. But safety doesn't inspire confidence. And in a season already defined by hesitation, the move felt symbolic. The failed conversion reopened every conversation Cleveland hoped was closed. About whether Sanders is truly the guy. About whether the coaching staff believes in him. About whether this offense is being built to succeed or simply survive. What made it worse was the context. The Browns were playing a struggling opponent, a game they needed, a moment that could have marked a turning point. Instead, it became another example of uncertainty at the worst possible time. The sideline argument exposed tension. The 60-yard touchdown offered hope. The 2-point decision extinguished it just as quickly. And once again, Cleveland was left answering the same question it's been asking for decades. Is this team actually committed to its quarterback, or just afraid of the consequences if it fully commits? When answers don't come from the sideline, they usually come from upstairs. And in Cleveland, the quietest room in the building may also be the most telling. Because while coaches and players were managing optics, the front office was doing what front offices always do in moments like this. Preparing for every outcome, including the one nobody wants to say out loud. Around the league, there's a growing belief that the Browns are treating this season less like a campaign to win and more like an extended evaluation. That doesn't mean they've given up. It means they're watching closely. Every snap, every reaction, every moment of adversity, who holds up, who fractures, who can be trusted when things get uncomfortable. The evidence is subtle, but it's there. Cleveland holds valuable draft capital in the coming years, including multiple high picks that give them flexibility. Flexibility is power in the NFL. It allows teams to pivot without admitting failure. And when an organization starts prioritizing flexibility, it's usually because certainty has slipped. Fans have already begun connecting dots. Names are floating around. Comparisons being made. Not as conclusions, but as possibilities. That alone says a lot. Quarterbacks don't get compared midseason unless doubt has entered the conversation. Whether fair or not, Sanders is now being evaluated in a way that feels less developmental and more final. Jeudy feels it too. His production has dipped. His role feels less defined. Around the league, his name has come up in quiet trade chatter. Not headlines. Whispers. The kind that signal a player might be viewed as an asset rather than a cornerstone. When relationships between quarterbacks and receivers get strained, front offices start asking whether it's easier to fix the connection or change the pieces. Even the veterans are sensing it. When a franchise cornerstone on defense starts publicly questioning the direction of the team, that's not noise. That's concern. Players with security don't speak up unless something feels off. And something feels off in Cleveland. What makes this situation dangerous is the lack of transparency. Nobody is saying Sanders is on the clock. Nobody is saying Jeudy is expendable. But nobody is saying the opposite either. Silence leaves room for speculation, and speculation changes how players perform. It tightens them, makes every mistake feel heavier. The front office doesn't need to announce a plan for it to exist. Backup plans rarely come with press releases. They come with scouting reports, draft boards, and contingency meetings. And once those wheels start turning, it's hard to stop them. This is the part of the story most fans never see. The part where decisions are being shaped quietly, long before they're executed. And whether Sanders and Jeudy realize it or not, every snap from here on out isn't just about the season. It's about whether they fit into whatever plan Cleveland is preparing to fall back on. Every Browns quarterback walks into more than a locker room. They walk into a history that refuses to stay buried. Decades of hope followed by collapse. Promising starts swallowed by chaos. And no matter how much the league changes, Cleveland's past has a way of creeping into the present. Since the franchise returned in 1999, the Browns have burned through quarterbacks at a pace that feels unreal. Starters came and went. Some arrived with hype, others with desperation. None escaped unscathed. Each failure added another layer of skepticism, another reason for fans and media to brace for disappointment instead of success. That history doesn't just live in stat sheets. It lives in expectations. Shedeur knew the narrative when he arrived. He didn't shy away from it. He talked about changing the culture, about believing where others doubted, about embracing pressure instead of running from it. Confidence has never been his issue, but confidence alone doesn't rewrite history. It has to be supported. That's where the curse becomes less mystical and more structural. Cleveland hasn't just struggled to find quarterbacks. It's struggled to protect them. Constant coaching changes, shifting offensive identities, mixed messaging about development versus winning now. Young quarterbacks are asked to lead without stability, then blamed when instability wins. What makes Sanders' situation feel familiar is how quickly the conversation has turned. One public argument, one coaching decision, and suddenly the patience feels thinner. The same cycle starting again. Hype, doubt, debate, reset. Former Browns quarterbacks didn't all fail because of talent. Many failed because they were caught between competing timelines. Coaches trying to save jobs, front offices hedging bets, veterans pushing for immediate results. That pressure squeezes rookies from every angle. Sanders now stands in that same spotlight, expected to deliver hope while navigating dysfunction he didn't create. The sideline confrontation wasn't just about chemistry. It was about the weight of history pressing down in real time. Every misstep gets amplified because fans have seen this ending before. That's the cruel part of the Browns' quarterback curse. It conditions everyone to expect collapse. When something goes wrong, it doesn't feel like an anomaly. It feels inevitable. That mindset infects locker rooms, sidelines, and front offices alike. The tragedy is that curses aren't broken by belief alone. They're broken by alignment. When everyone pulls in the same direction, when development isn't rushed or sabotaged, when trust isn't conditional. Until that happens, even the most confident quarterback becomes another chapter instead of a conclusion. And that's the crossroads Cleveland is standing at now. Whether Sanders becomes the one who changes the story or just another name added to the list won't be decided by talent alone. It'll be decided by whether the organization finally breaks the pattern that's haunted it for over 2 decades. It all circles back to that sideline moment, the one that wasn't supposed to air. What looked like a brief argument now feels more like a fork in the road, not just for Shedeur and Jeudy, but for the entire Browns organization. On one side is the turning point narrative, the idea that the confrontation forced uncomfortable truths into the open, that it exposed flaws early enough to correct them. The 60-yard touchdown supports that version. So does the brief stretch where the offense finally looked synchronized. For a moment, it felt like clarity replaced confusion, like roles were being defined instead of avoided. On the other side is the breaking point, the version where the argument wasn't a reset, but a symptom, a warning sign of deeper fractures that can't be patched with a few good plays. The 2-point conversion decision leans heavily in that direction. So does the silence from the front office. So does the uneasy feeling that trust is being rationed instead of built. What makes this moment so precarious is that both narratives can be true at the same time. The connection between Sanders and Jeudy can exist, while the structure around them continues to fail. A quarterback and receiver can find chemistry, while the organization undermines it with hesitation and fear. Kevin Stefanski's role looms large in this uncertainty. His decisions feel less like confidence and more like self-preservation. Coaching scared rarely produces bold results. And when a coach is fighting for survival, development often becomes collateral damage. That's a dangerous environment for any young quarterback, especially one carrying the expectations Sanders walked into. The Browns have been here before, moments that could have marked the beginning of something real, only to unravel because alignment never followed. That's why fans aren't celebrating flashes anymore. They're waiting for consistency, for commitment, for proof that this time is different. As the season moves forward, every interaction will be scrutinized, every missed throw, every sideline exchange, every coaching decision. The cameras will be ready, not because the league wants drama, but because Cleveland has trained everyone to expect it. Sanders will keep starting. Jeudy will keep lining up as the primary target. On paper, nothing changes. But beneath the surface, everything is being evaluated. Not just talent, but trust. Not just performance, but belief. Whether this moment becomes a turning point or a breaking point depends on what happens when the noise fades. When the headlines move on. When the organization has to choose a direction instead of straddling one. Because Cleveland's quarterback curse doesn't need another victim. It needs accountability. And the next few weeks will reveal whether the Browns are ready to finally confront that, or if this was just another moment they let slip away on camera.
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets us know you love this kind of content. And hey, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with your friends, your group chats, or anyone who loves football as much as you do. The more the conversation spreads, the better it gets. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss when we drop fresh stories, wild rumors, or breaking updates that the mainstream media won't talk about.